From Built It Productions, it's The Great Creators. Conversations about creativity with some of the most celebrated actors, musicians, and performers of our time. I'm 𝐦𝐤𝐬𝐤, and on the show today, Bjork, and how her otherworldly melodies began to pour out of her at an early age in Iceland.
It was sort of a long way to walk to school, and I actually loved it, and it was sort of my moment of singing top of my lungs and like sort of ecstasy moment in being in harmony with nature.
Björk is, and I should probably address the elephant in the room here, it's not pronounced Bjork, it's Björk. So how do you describe someone like her? She's one of the most gifted and radical public artists in the world. She's made records that have topped the dance charts, but also albums that aren't radio-friendly, that are challenging and require you, the listener, to give it time and concentration. She's created magical installations, performed in costumes that seem like they were produced in another galaxy, and has never stopped exploring the outer limits of her creativity. No matter the medium, Björk says the sound comes first, then the visual palette. Her latest record is called Fossora, from the Latin word for digger. The sound is deep and resonant and features 6 bass clarinets. The visual metaphors for this album? Mushrooms and underground tree roots. In this episode, you'll hear how Björk considers herself, not surprisingly, an introvert, and how she learned to come out of her shell to perform for the world. You'll learn why her work often references the natural world, and it's not because she's a diehard back-to-nature type. And how starting with a concept, whether it's orchids or mushrooms, helps her find a coherent sound for each album. And you'll go behind the scenes of Björk's collaborations and the different approaches she takes depending on the medium. That's all coming up after this quick break. Björk began studying music at a very early age and released her first record in 1977 when she was just 11 years old. More than 40 years later, she's still making music, and her fans now span across at least 2 generations. And one of them is my 13-year-old son. Before we start, I have a question for you from my 13-year-old son. He asked me to ask you a question, so I'm going to ask you his question. Cool. He says, "Hi, Daddy. Here's what I want to say. Hi, Björk. It's so cool to meet one of my favorite artists of all time." He asks, how does it feel to be such a big influence for so many of my favorite artists, like, I don't know, some of these, Blady, Death Grips, SZA, wouldn't be here today without your influence. Anyway, that was his question. How does it feel to be an influence to so many other artists?
Wow, on so many levels. That's very knowledgeable for that age. And I'm also, of course, very flattered that every time when my music becomes, is like crosses generations, that's always a very precious thing for a musician. Yeah, when it comes to influencing, like the people that you named, I guess I have some sort of a blind spot for it myself. I think maybe the best way I could answer this is maybe when I was his age, or when I was a teenager in Iceland, we would have like 17 people would come to the show of my band at the time. And so I think from very early on, I was very committed to be sort of in my little niche or branch on the music tree, whatever it would be, and whatever it would take. And I think there's pros and cons with that. I think the prose is that it kind of crosses genders and also seems to me a little bit cross generations, right? If you're a bit of a sort of eccentric nerd, you will end up uniting with all the other eccentric nerds out there, no matter what year they're born.
Yeah.
But I remember my favorite music like when I was maybe 14 or something, and I discovered Kate Bush, and by just accident, one of her vinyls ended up in my arms, which because there was nothing like that in Iceland then and no internet. It was like many years since that album had come out, so it was not in the zeitgeist of Kate Bush or the 80s. And I just listened to it non-stop for months, and I really remember that feeling like I didn't need it to be part of the year that I was listening to. And I think I've always remembered that feeling when I'm making my music, that I would rather want someone to discover an album of mine in some flea market in 20 years and get obsessed by it. And out of the context of the year it was made in, or the zeitgeist, or the fashion, or what was on the radio, or whatever, and just take it for what it is. So I think that's the only way I can answer your son's question. Yeah, but does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
cool.
It is really interesting to see how people rediscover or discover, music that was made, 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you about your earliest memory of music. I've read you describe going to the harbor with your grandfather and hearing the sounds of ships, and that was musical to you. That might not actually be your earliest memory, but maybe it is. Do you have an early memory of understanding music or musicality around you?
Yes, I think the sort of earliest one is not maybe one specific memory, but I was very blessed that I was brought up in a home. It has been a little bit distorted in the media, like as a hippie commune.
Right.
It actually wasn't. It was more an apartment people shared downtown Reykjavik with, 5 rooms or something. And people all had normal jobs. But yes, they did have long hair. And it was more about sort of the music tastes they had, which was hippie, So there was a record player there and big speakers, and there would be a queue always, and people would be playing like Jimi Hendrix, Joni Mitchell, Frank Zappa, and my stepfather would be listening to stuff like Cream and King Crimson and things like that, and it was just played loud the whole time, and every time like a vinyl album was finishing, there would be somebody would be standing by the record player waiting. Okay, I'm next. I want to play this next. So there was kind of more music than talking. So I just remember being brought up, like be one of these people who was brought up in a home where there's always music quite loud. So it becomes almost like a sculptural thing or a soundscape that you feel more normal if there's music loud around you. It's more like natural for you than to have sofa and table and chairs, So that was from very early on. I think from when I was like 3 years old or 4. I think I remember actually sitting on the floor in an apartment my mother rented, and we've sort of gathered that I must have been maybe 4-year-old or something, and looking at the album, holding it, the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band with the Beatles, and thinking, wow, I don't like this. Like, this is not, I don't like this. This is, and then hearing something else and thinking like, wow, I love this. This is like being in a chocolate warm chocolate pudding melting all around me. I love this. I want to be here forever. So I think, yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is irritating for you or if it's interesting to you, but so much of your life has been recorded, right? Because from a very early age you were singing, and much of that is, you can see it, you can hear, you can see you reading a story at age 5 or 6 on Icelandic television and singing the Tina Charles song "I Love to Love" when you were 11 years old. And it's remarkable to watch you over that time, evolve into who you are now. When did you first understand that you had a voice, that you could actually sing and use it?
Wow, good question. I think because I would walk to school, and it was sort of a long way to walk to school. And I actually loved it. And it was sort of my moment of singing top of my lungs and like sort of ecstasy moment in being in harmony with nature. And I did that for like 10 years or something. I don't know. It's hard to count it. But I never, ever thought that was something I would share. I know it doesn't make sense now, but when you're a kid, you're not thinking like that. It's more intuitive. It was an impulsive. It's something. It was like, oh, this is my secret. This is what I do when I'm on my own, and this is my cave, and I love it. And I never ever thought I would share it. And then my mother put actually that Tina Charles recording. I think it's actually, I was like 9. It was. There was a radio show my school did. It was like a talent show. And everybody had to do something different. But when I was 11, there was an album came out that my mother was part of, that she sort of did with her other sort of friends. And they were very, very kind to me. And, you got to give it to hippies. They're so good with children and education. It's the best environment to be brought up in. And so much time, hours and hours to sit with me, go through music, go through lyrics, teach me how to use a microphone, everything. And after that experience, when the album came out, I was very adamant that this did not feel right to me.
This is the album that came out when you were 11. I think it's called Björk, right?
And I thought I would never, ever do a solo album. I was like, I tried that, don't like it. I just want to be part of my generation, to do communal things with kids my age,
Yeah.
So if we go back to your question, what was the moment where I thought I would be singing for people? I don't think there was one moment. I think sometimes I was in an amazing school, which was like a Montessori school, and which I loved. And we would go on trips in buses, and I would kind of always end up being singing in the bus, just on my own. And it wasn't like me standing up, look at me. It was more like I was sitting in the back, just like humming, So, so it was definitely something that people kind of asked of me, and I would do, and I would really enjoy doing. But it wasn't like, it was more sort of a soothing thing and calming thing. My first instinct was to be a drummer. I wanted to be a drummer. And when I started in like punk bands, the first band I was in, I was a drummer, but nobody wanted to sing, and I ended up singing. So it was more like that. So sorry, how many answers to that question?
I think it's interesting you talk about your kind of reluctance to be in the front and kind of do solo work. And I think all of your work has been collaborative. Even all of your solo records have been about finding interesting people to work with, which I want to ask you about in a moment. But it strikes me as quite remarkable because you're a self-described introvert. You have described yourself as somebody who doesn't really like to be in the spotlight and out there, and yet, of course, your whole life and career you've been in the spotlight and on stage. And early on, when you were, sort of singing in bands, I think the first band you really sang in was, I'm going to mess up the pronunciation, but Tapi Tikaras, which I think is a kind of in English, it's not a very nice thing, I think, right?
Yeah.
Translation. But you were you were out in front and as a self-described introvert. So how did you kind of manage that?
Well, the first band I was in with the girls, that was more, I was the drummer. And then that was in one band with this girl, which was sort of multi-instrumental thing, like very conceptual. We were recording my grandfather's snoring and then playing that and singing, using it as a drum machine, singing on top of that. So it was pretty experimental.
I think it was called Jam 80, right? That was a band?
No, that was another one. Anyway.
Got it.
Bryndís and Björk's big band. That's what it was called. But yeah, anyway, so there were many little bands, it's typical, right, for that age. But I think the two bands came later, like Tapi Tikaras that you mentioned, and also 𝐥𝐤 and also 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞. All these three bands, I had a co-singer who was more the communicator, who was more the MC, who was more talking in the microphone between songs. And I could be more the introvert. I was more being more like a musical instrument, and I actually didn't use words for a really long time. I was singing more in my own sort of gibberish introvert language that I then slowly, over the period of 15 years, started finding words to, first Icelandic and then English. And then when I was 27, I was finally ready to release a solo album with words all over the place. So it was a long process for me, a very long process.
Do you still feel that way? Do you feel that you are inherently introverted, or do you feel like it's something that you would no longer describe yourself as?
Well, I think I'm naturally an introvert, yes. But everybody on the planet are a mix of introvert and extrovert. So I think my extroversy is something that I learned. It doesn't mean that I'm not sincere. But for example, when I do interviews, I have to drink like 4 cappuccinos. And I'm sorry to inform you that I'm heavily under the influence at the moment of
caffeine.
Of caffeine.
Me too. That's great.
Yeah, we can join this moment together. And then I will sort of retreat. I have like an interview day, and the next day I will sort of maybe just go for a walk on my own and sort of retreat back.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I think, aren't we all a little bit like that? Overall, I think so. But yeah, but I don't know. I'm very talkative with friends and family. The people that are closest to me. If you would be like in a room with a lot of people that I didn't know, I would not be the one who goes on stage and does a speech. That would be absolutely my idea of a nightmare. So yeah, that's sort of the spectrum that I'm on, if that makes sense.
When we come back after this quick break, Björk talks about how she manages to reinvent herself on every album, bringing in everything from punk to jazz to electronic music, while also managing to keep her sound consistently recognizable. Stay with us. I'm 𝐦𝐤𝐬𝐺, and you're listening to The Great Creators.
Do you spend sleepless nights worrying about being submerged in quicksand, being attacked by an unrelenting swarm of killer bees, or how you'd outswim an angry giant shark? I'm Anthony Atamanuik, and I'm here to tell you to stop worrying and let me, an anxious and overly informed comedian, be your guide to solving your most worrisome what-ifs. Don't Panic, a new comedy podcast from Wondery, leans into our most absurd anxieties and diffuses them with humor and actual advice for how to deal should you find yourself facing your fears. You'll laugh, learn, and possibly sweat profusely. Enjoy Don't Panic on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to Don't Panic early and ad-free on Wondery Plus. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts.
Hey, welcome back to The Great Creators. I'm 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐬. Björk's previous album was called Utopia and featured flutes and airy synth sounds. It was light and ethereal. Her latest album, Fossora, is the opposite, with lots of heavy beats and bass clarinets. One of the things that you've talked about is reinvention, and you've even said, you know, you have to redefine yourself every year because it's part of living. I think you quote a Bob Dylan line, which is, "If you're not being born, you're dying," or something. I'm messing up the line, but explain to me this idea of reinvention, because the work that you do, whether it's on this new album that's about to be released or your earliest work, they are so different. All of the things that you do are so different. They're bound, I think, by certain themes like nature, but they are very, very different in their style, in their arrangements. Tell me about this idea of reinvention and how you assimilate that into your life and work.
I think overall it's like a enjoyment feeling you get if you are being true to how you feel. So in that sense, it's sort of, in a way, selfish, I guess, because I think maybe with musicians too, is you got this kind of loop. Maybe we are lucky in that way. You get like a loop of, you release an album, you tour it, and you play every song 100 times. You get bored with it. You come home, you're like, okay, I'm never going to write a song like that ever again. I'm going to write now something that I can still sing it 100 times without getting bored with it. It is quite helpful, that model, in sort of encouraging you to grow with it, you know, to throw off the last sort of skeleton, or like it's like a transformation that you go through, and I welcome it. I think in some ways I am very conservative. Obviously, I always have to write with the same vocal chords, and my sense of harmony has been pretty consistent since I was a teenager. What sort of chords I pick and stuff like that. So I do think it's more sort of the arrangement or the sort of environment I find myself in. And I do try to learn from my mistakes emotionally and be someone who grows and becomes a better person. So in that sense, it has a trajectory, of course. But overall, I come back to the beginning of this answer, which was, at the end of the day, it's about what feels right. And I think we all know that feeling, you know, when we go to dinner with our chosen favorite friends of that year and we all look at each other in the eye and get one drink, and it's like, yes, like this is, we threw off some luggage and we are here together and it feels fresh. And there's, you know, nature rewards us, right? It gives us a good feeling when we did our homework and tried to grow and throw off old luggage that doesn't work. And And then I don't necessarily mean throw off people, because that's, very often you need to go through all these transformations with the same people and hopefully have a long-term relationship with them, which I'm very blessed that a lot of my work relationships have been for years, even decades.
Yeah. So, I've seen you perform many times, going back to the mid-1990s. And what's remarkable about your work and your art is, as I mentioned, it's just the variety and the variability, but the different kinds of things you do within them and across genres, whether it's music, art, film, dance, even the costumes that you wear and the designs that you bring on stage. It's a very, very big question and sort of an abstract question, and it's hard to answer, but I wonder where do ideas come from? Where do you find ideas? Where do you look for them?
Well, I think because I walked a lot as a kid, and like I told you before, and was singing there, I think all my work is still sort of based on these melodies. And these melodies are kind of the shape they are, a bit eccentric shapes. Maybe because they come from me walking outside in Iceland in all different weathers, and they go all different directions. They are free. They're not tied down. That's usually my starting point. And a lot of musicians that work with me, for example, people who make beats, they are very surprised when we have to start from the melodies, and then I have usually a team of engineers that help me map that out and putting like a grid to that, programming a grid to something that's freeform afterwards, which sometimes is actually a lot of work. And then you have to put beats to that. A lot of electronic music, the beats come first, and then people improvise on top of beats. I've done that for sure. There are songs in my catalog that are like that, but overall it's an exception. And I try to be truthful to the musical language or shape that is information that is in the melody, because usually there will be, it's like solving a murder mystery. Usually there is an emotion there is an arrangement to be done, and then the visual world, it is also informed by the sound, and this is usually the sort of mood board that I give to my visual collaborators. Like each album I will give them the same, like for example on Utopia or on Fossora, I would give the sort of 7 different visual people I work with, photographers or film directors or animators. They would get all the same references, and there will be like sort of some visual mood board I would give them, but that was always inspired by sound, and in that sense, it is maybe something that I've learned really slowly, but over like a long period of time, it's like some sort of attempt to do some sort of a synesthesia. Because, for example, the title, of Fossora, this my new album, is basically trying to describe the sound of it. Because it is full of bass clarinets, it's very bottom end, it's very bottom heavy. So I use this word Fossora, which means she who digs into the ground. So it is describing an underground world, and all the visuals, sorry, this is a bit of a spoiler, will all happen in the ground with mushrooms and tree roots and bass clarinets. And for example, Utopia, the album that was before, that came out 2017, that was almost the opposite. It was City in the Clouds, 12 flutes. There was almost no bass or bass drum in it. It was all floating in the air. So it was very element air. And that was very how I was feeling at that time. It was sort of euphoric, ecstatic, futuristic, very idealistic, like trying to create a paradise, but it doesn't have the roots yet. It's not grounded,
Yeah.
And this album is in that way is sort of the continuation of that. It is where I take all the ideas on utopia and give them roots and ground them and dig a hole in the ground and kind of execute the ideals in real life, with tables and chairs and cup of tea and friends.
Yeah.
Maybe a bottle of champagne and some jokes and a couple of clarinets.
You reference the underground world and mushrooms and it's interesting because mushrooms are underground networks, right? They're communicators. It's how trees communicate to other trees through these underground mycelium forests. And I'm not surprised that this record, Fossora, is about, is sort of, again, it sort of comes from your relationship to nature and the natural world. And so much of your work is connected to the natural world. Just, I guess, not just where you are now and where you grew up, but what you see around you, right? I mean, it's almost as if you take cues from nature, that you're looking around and it almost creates the art for you. Is that fair to say?
Well, this is an interesting question. We could probably write a whole book on this subject matter. I think for me, it's normal. I think people who are brought up in cities, like are urban, for them, like referring to buildings or the subway or libraries or train stations, that's normal for them, right? For me, because I was brought up in Iceland and I went once abroad when I was 12, and the next time when I was 15. So basically my first 15 years I was pretty much just here in Iceland, and it is the same, like walking in nature. It is just normal for me. It's not supernatural or extraterrestrial but also it's not back to nature. It's not like, oh, let's abandon civilization and let's all move back into caves. That's never been my message or what I'm about. I would actually like to move forward to nature and have our drum machines and iPhones and tech and solar powered and wind energy and electric cars, but we don't have to abandon nature. We can be in it and experience the best of both worlds. So for me, it's hard to separate the two because it sort of is the same. It's normal for me, but I do think though when I say, okay, this is my orchid album or this is my mushroom album. It is a shortcut. I am actually describing a sound. And right. When I call this the fungus album, it is basically, I want people to listen to it really loudly and have in big speakers or headphones. And it's very, very bottom end, kind of dingy, kind of, what musicians, they would say to each other, oh, it's kind of like roots or how dub music is. From Jamaica or something. It's very bottom end, sort of mushroomy. and musicians they speak like that and they get it, So that's sort of what I'm trying. It's actually meant to be a visual shortcut, but it probably sounds like something very exotic and sci-fi. But in my strange brain, musician brain, it's meant to be some sort of like a visual shortcut actually describing the sound of it.
You made this record in Reykjavik. You went back, I think during COVID and spent much of COVID there. You've lived in New York and London but have spent a lot of time in Reykjavik in the last, I guess, 2-3 years. What has it been like for you to be back there? For such a concentrated amount of time, because for so long you were traveling or bouncing in and staying just for a few days or a few weeks and, living elsewhere. So what has it been like to be back, sort of both feet planted on the ground?
Yeah, I really loved it. It felt, it felt amazing. I haven't been so long in Iceland since I was 16 or something, so I really loved it. I mean, during the periods I lived in London and New York, I was still kind of 60% in Iceland. I never let go of Iceland. I always had a home here too and spent majority of my time here. But I got all my boxes from, New York, and all of my belongings are now on this island, which is very, satisfying. I also just like the sort of village life of walking up the street and meeting friends that have been my friends since I was a teenager in the local cafe or the swimming pool, grocery store, and also just kind of the simplicity of, being able to meet your friends for dinner without any planning, or being very spontaneous, or you want to go on a hike or get drunk downtown or whatever you want to do. You can just do it. And that was something that when you're living in a big city, stuff like that can be quite like a lot of effort. Obviously, I struck lucky. I was surrounded by all my friends and family in the pandemic, so I am aware of how lucky I was. It's a small peninsula surrounded by ocean, so even though in the most extreme lockdown periods, Icelanders could always go for a walk by the ocean. Plus, we had a nice, cute little volcano on our horizon. So it was a good life.
When we come back, after a quick break, Björk shares insights into how she works with collaborators. It's very different depending on whether it's with other musicians or filmmakers or videographers or graphic designers. Stay with us. I'm 𝐥𝐤𝐬𝐺, and you're listening to The Great Creators. Hey, welcome back to The Great Creators. I'm 𝐥𝐤𝐬𝐺. Björk has cultivated a huge network of collaborators, and that collaboration plays a really important part in how she's able to continually evolve as a creator. I am curious about collaboration because I think that even with the work you've done as a solo artist, you've always sought out collaborators, and it's kind of remarkable the different collaborators that you've worked with. I mean, David Attenborough, or certain producers or artists. I mean, all of the art that you produce and create with collaborators has been really interesting, and I wonder how you think about seeking out collaborators and people to work with, because I think that is a big part of how you sort of build new artistic ideas.
I think more and more as I get older, there's a longer time that passes. I will complete the album more with the engineer that I'm working with at any given time, and I will invite the guests later in. So it is solitaire affair, writing music, which I love. I am a bit of a loner at heart, and
When you write music, you're by yourself?
Most of the time, I will go either walking, or I will work on my laptop, or go to my cabin, or work in my apartment in town. And then afterwards, I will introduce guests. So I would say more and more I am sort of a little bit idiosyncratic in my vision when it comes to the music. But I think maybe in the visuals, maybe I'm more collaborative there because I obviously don't look at myself as a visual artist. I am more a collaborator when it comes to visuals. So each video, for example, for this album has a team of several people, and we did it sort of together. It was like a group effort thing. And that actually reminds me more of, when I was in bands for 15 years, which was a big chunk of my life, where you sort of walk into the room and everybody throw a lot of ideas on the table, and then you goes with what sticks, and it's sort of like a democratic process. And I really enjoy that. It's kind of more selfless for me. I'm less precious about that because I don't really have sort of a ambition as a visual artist. But I think with the music, it's the opposite. I'm always very aware of how much little time we have. If I'm lucky, I've got 20 years, of full energy. And you sort of start to think, okay, damn, I still haven't done this idea and that idea. And there's still like 10 ideas you haven't done yet. So you sort of have to kind of roll up your sleeves and get things done and make sure you document kind of what you got given in the most truthful way before you leave the planet. So I do feel sort of a sense of obligation in that way to try to listen to what my DNA is, because we're all very different. So I guess I'm always sort of on the hunt of finding the circumstances and the environment where that sort of comes out of me more naturally, with less will or ego or effort. This question was about collaborations. I think it's also one of these contradictions. If you love yourself, you can love somebody else. If you're good at working on your own, you're a good collaborator. It's that sort of the beehive philosophy. If you help yourself, people will come and help you. I do have wonderful moments on this album that are very collaborative with both the 𝐥𝐸𝐬𝐬 choir, which I'm very proud of. It's 9 different voices in one song. It's probably the most complex choir arrangement I made. They rehearsed it for weeks and weeks and weeks. They said it was one of the most difficult songs they've ever sung. Partly because of COVID, it ended up being a very collaborative album with the engineer Bergur Þórisson, who also is a musician. He also makes instruments, and he is also classically trained and plays the trombone. So, and I was lucky enough that he was in my bubble, what do you call it, lockdown bubble, made that sacrifice with me. And there is also, obviously there are Emily Nicholas and Serpent with Feet. And then, of course, the 6 bass clarinet players. And then, of course, my children.
Are both on this record.
My son and my daughter are both singing, which felt very, very natural. And it felt like the right time in so many ways and so many levels.
I wonder about the number of things you've made, whether it's art or films or collaboration albums or your own records, is too many to describe. You seem to kind of hint at it, but this idea that you have this inner urgency to make new things, that it's part of your obligation, I think was the word you used, to create art. And is that what motivates you? I mean, you make so much. You're making new things all the time, and it seems like you are working on things all of the time. And does it come from this sense of urgency that, that time is limited, that we're basically every day we're one day closer to the end?
I think actually I did allow myself on this album. That's maybe why there's 5 years since the last one. this one I actually had all the time in the world, and I felt the present that I want to give to myself for all the hard work and all the sort of, it was like, okay, here's an opportunity. What do you want to give to yourself? And I was like, you know what? I want to give myself, take the pressure off and just have all the time in the world. So I was sometimes, just 2 weeks, just having dinner with friends, going on hike, maybe got an idea that was okay. I was like, I'm not going to follow that one. I'm just going to wait. And then 2 weeks later, I would get an idea I thought was much better, and then I would complete that. So maybe earlier, I would have, I would have had a lot of other things on. So when I got sort of an idea that maybe was sort of average, I would finish it anyway and just try to make it good in the execution or something. But I think with this one, I really tried to sort of just give the part of me that is just willpower and sort of ego, sort of work ethic part of me. I just asked it to go away, and just only if it came naturally, I would do it. And I was very blessed because the engineer I work with was living 3 minutes away from me, so I could just text him. So in that sense, I did take the sort of pressure off and wanted maybe to document more sort of an effortless side in me. And, when I don't have to live in 2 countries or live on airports or hotels, that I could just be home and walk to the local shop and then go swimming and then walk back home. And what would happen if I did that for 2-3 years, and just what would just happen completely naturally. So that album was very that for me.
How much of the work that you do you discard? I mean, when you describe being, working in solitude and working on songs and arrangements, and how much of what you write ends up never being made, that you just feel isn't good enough?
That's a good question.
I mean, when you're writing something and you're working out a song or melody, and you're reaching back to that time when you were a girl walking to school, trying to hear those melodies, maybe, how much of something do you say, no, that's not right? Or maybe this will work, and then you work on it, and then you just toss it off. You just throw it away.
Well, I still walk, so my melodies have changed. So I do try to tap into the person I'm now, it's not nostalgic to my childhood in that sense.
Right.
I actually overall, I can only compare myself to other musicians, but people that I have worked with, and I've seen that they have sometimes dozens or even hundreds of songs they haven't used. I'm definitely not one of those people. I think I'm more like, if 14 songs end up on the album, I kind of started out with 17, and sometimes the sort of extra 3 or 4 songs were just arrangements or melodies. Like, I didn't complete them. I think overall, the way I work, it's all about timing. Like, if you don't include how you're feeling, how your environment is, how the people around you are, the music you're listening to, the music you're dancing to, the books you're reading, the films you're watching, like basically everything that's sort of in that sort of 3-year period, you'll end up paying the price later. Do you know what I mean? So I think very much what I do is about synchronizing all of these things. So it's sort of about waiting for the stars to align and waiting, and then suddenly, wow, like here I can three things of my life of February 2020 have aligned up, so I'm gonna document it. I think it's sort of holistic in that sense, or it's more, I think maybe it's sort of quite a feminine way to work, because it is not about creating 1,000 things. It's more about where is the moment where I have 4 things here that need connection and I can connect them. And a lot of my lyrics actually are weirdly sort of, how do I find the flow? Something like that would be a typical me sentence. Because I am very focused on that. Like, I'm trying to find the flow between the rhythms that I'm listening to at the moment, or the friends I'm hanging out with, and the people I love, and what's happening in the world, and talking about the environment, and whatever. And suddenly you wake up one morning and you can feel that you can connect 4 out of 6 of those, and that feels pretty good. So it's more about the connections between them, or the flow, rather than the individual events, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. So when you work that way, you actually end up with not that many ideas. So you end up rather building the 14 things you have, rather than making 50 ideas. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How important is it for you to have days or periods where your brain is not engaged? Because I think your brain is working a lot. I think just because of the output of your career and the variety and the different things that you've done, and the artistic expression that you've put out into the world, in order to create that work, how important is it for you to just go through periods of time where you are not using your brain, where you're just allowing it to kind of go in different directions, and not? Do you need periods of time where you do nothing?
Absolutely. I think actually a lot of the time I'm like that. I think maybe when I do interviews, people get a different side of me, because I kind of drink 4 cappuccinos and then I talk very fast and pretend I know everything. And then the caffeine wears off and I wake up like, oh, I actually don't know anything. So usually I'm not this sort of motor-mouthy kind of sort of person. But I think also because obviously I tour a lot, and then I think that's very much a celebration of the body, because I'm like obviously a singer, so I'm more like an athlete, or it's about like eating the right things and doing yoga and warming my voice up. And I really love that part of my job, and going on walks and just being really, really, really physical. Like, my body is my instrument, and you just leave, like, the people I work with, like my manager, they cannot even write me emails when I'm touring, because my brain is just at home. Like, I don't even mix those 2 states, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I think obviously writing music is more impulsive for me, because I start from melodies, so that's more sort of instinct, and because I'm a singer, it's obviously quite physical. I think the moments where my brain comes into the picture is maybe more where I'm writing lyrics, and I do try to start with lyrics like that they have impulsive connection to the song. So I will have like stick words or guide words. And then, because it's not natural for me to write lyrics, sometimes it literally takes, I'll write like, 40 pages of words, and then I have to edit it down to 1 page to the lyric. It sometimes goes through a really long road. But that's because words is not my first like natural way of expressing myself, but I do feel very strongly about which word should be in my songs. So I do make the effort, and I do search sort of, and I don't give up till I found the words I feel are the right ones. Maybe also what you could maybe say a little bit is the brainy side of my work is my arrangements, and I feel more and more, when I'm making like a string arrangement or a clarinet arrangement, maybe I will write a song and that takes an hour to write the melody, or like it'll be very impulsive, like quick thing. And then maybe I will spend months on working on the arrangement. Another way I can answer your question, sorry how long answer this is ever since I was a teenager, or when I was in bands, or even now, I've never been able to do like long hours. When I was in bands and they wanted to like work, jam or improvise into the night, I could never ever do that. I was always the sort of kind of girl, and I still am, that I kind of want to work from like noon till 4 or 5 in the daytime, and I rather prepare well, warm up my voice, watch a lot of films, have conversations with friends, and then come and work for 4 hours very intensively. And then I will have a couple of days off. I'd never work in evenings, for example. I've never been able to do that. And like after 4 or 5 o'clock, my brain just turns off and I just become impulsive again. And I just want to hang out with friends or family, or watch films, or listen to music, or, go on walks or do stuff like that. Yeah, sorry for my long answer.
I think that's why you've been so prolific, because you do limit the amount of time that you are focused on. But when you are focused, it's intensive. And I do think that explains why you've been able to create so much work.
Yeah, I think also the amount of work I've done is kind of because I've done it for so long. That's a long time. It's accumulative. I think 5 years between albums is and 14 songs. I don't think that's definitely not workaholic. I feel like overall, I think more when I fall into the trap of working too much is because I do so many different things. That's more complex for me, because I am both present when my album is mixed and mastered, and I'm there when my videos are edited, and I will look at all the versions of the photos, and I will mix the live album, and I will find the clothes, and so it's all the different things. That sometimes I find it a little bit taxing, that I have to put so many hats on, maybe sometimes in the same week or something. But at the end of the day, I do it all for the song. And I feel it's something that's worth it, because I feel if you write a song and you sing it and you want to present it to the world, the amount of effort you put to travel across the world in an airplane to sing it for someone, or find the colors or the costume that fit it, or photographs that suit it. And I do think it's worth it. So So there you go.
That's singer, actor, and conceptual artist Björk. Her latest album is called Fossora. To see the show notes for this episode and links to Björk's work, check out thegreatcreators.com/Björk. And you can check out all of our episodes at thegreatcreators.com. Hey, it's Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. For more like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And for the audio version, just open up your favorite podcast app, search for The Great Creators, and tap follow.